I don't give a shit what the number says. So there you go. If you're the number one contender, it means nothing. If you have upset the brass, if you have upset the company, the promotion, you're not fighting for the belt. So it's not the best fighting the best. It's not the number one contender fights the champion. It's if you are in their good graces at that moment in time, you will fight for the belt. Just ask Arman Tsarukyan. And by the way, this has happened before. UFC 177, Renan Barão loses the title to TJ Dillashaw. He is scheduled to fight TJ Dillashaw in Sacramento, UFC 177. On weigh-in day, he slips, he hits his head, he's ruled out. Joe Soto steps in to fight TJ Dillashaw. Renan Barão has to fight one fight. He beats Mitch Gagnon. He beats him. He gets another crack at TJ Dillashaw.
I've only ever done what the UFC's asked me to do, and every contract they've put in front of me I've signed. I've never missed weight, I've never pulled out, I've never fucked a fight up like some certain dickheads. So, you know, that's probably the reason I'm in this position now.
Let's start with this, because for as much as you get for people saying like, oh, he might not deserve it, this and that, you've always said, you're like, look, bro, I fight whoever's put in front of me. Whatever name comes in front of me on a contract, that's who I fight.
You know, I'm going to turn up and I'm going to fight.
What do you think about that? So I guess we're not going to mention his name, but
Posh boy.
well, yes, but because there's a lot of people advocating for him. But do you think because of what had happened with the Islam Makhachev fight, even though he just beat Dan Hooker, he headlined, he's kind of been slid out of the way?
It's not even just that though, is it? You know what I mean? People talk about my last 3 wins. Yeah, it's Tony Ferguson, who was on his way out. Well, Dariush looks about 65. You know what I mean? He's got a full head of grey hair. He beat Dariush. He didn't beat Charles Oliveira.
I said, okay, I'm not fake like you. He's in the live, one person, in the social media, another person. I don't want to be fake. I'm real. If I want to say something to you, I'll say the same thing, you know.
Do you have any idea what's going on with him right now? He hasn't fought since June, and we don't know, Charles has fought.
He's trying to find easy fight and to defend that belt and go up. And UFC trying to make him to be a superstar and defend the title. Because right now he cannot go up to the 170 because he didn't defend the title. Why he gotta go 170?
Look, nobody saw this one coming. Not the diehard fans tracking every single move in the lightweight rankings, not the fighters sitting cage-side watching everything unfold, and absolutely not the UFC executives who thought they had their entire plan locked down tight. But the second Arman Tsarukyan decided to back out of what was supposed to be his moment, his shot at proving he belonged at the very top, the entire lightweight landscape got flipped upside down in ways we're still seeing play out right now.
Charles had Gamrot, and Justin didn't have anyone, so I thought it could be Justin, and then it just never ended up panning out, lad, but it's ended up working out, so.
What would be a bigger press conference, Paddy Ilya or a guy that's rumored to be coming back, Paddy McGregor?
Definitely be McGregor, like, you know what I mean? Ilya's a Timu version of McGregor, you know what I mean? He's a cheap version.
Listen, I think that's about it, man. You're going to see him headline at UFC 324 against Justin Gaethje for are we going to call it the official UFC lightweight champion? Let's start with this, because for as much as you get for people saying like, oh, he might not deserve it, this and that, you've always said, you're like, look, bro, I fight whoever's put in front of me. Whatever name comes in front of me on a contract, that's who I fight.
I've only ever done what the UFC's asked me to do, and every contract they've put in front of me I've signed. I've never missed weight, I've never pulled out, I've never fight up like some certain kids. So that's probably the reason I'm in this position now.
And you were like, I want my first UFC lightweight title defense to be against Ilia Topuria. So the way things have panned out, you're viewing this fight against Justin Gaethje as the actual UFC lightweight title.
What started as what looked like just another injury situation, something fighters deal with constantly in this sport, slowly morphed into one of the messiest, most politically charged sagas the lightweight division has witnessed in recent memory. And here's the part most people completely missed while all this was happening. Inside UFC headquarters, behind closed doors where the real decisions get made, the situation triggered something way more intense than simple scheduling headaches. It lit a fuse that many people close to the organization swear has turned into Dana White carrying around serious personal resentment ever since he got that phone call.
Interesting is when they use the UFC as the example, as our great friend New York Rick pointed out on social media a couple times, they'll use the UFC as an example of saying, like, look, in the UFC, the number one contender fights for the belt, and that's how it will be. That's how it will always be when we're in charge. As we know, it's never been like that, especially not now. It's worse now than ever. Just ask a guy named Arman Tsarukyan. And so you'll have a situation where last week, Nick Khan is telling all the media that he spoke to, in the UFC, the best fight, the number one contender fights for the belt. And you have Arman Tsarukyan, who is the number one contender in the UFC's lightweight division. Not only is he not fighting for the belt next, he is not even in the interim title fight to determine who's the interim champion, and we suspect that the interim champion will then fight the champion. And when asked about that, what does Dana White say? I don't care about the number. If you ever had any indication, if you ever wanted to know truly how meaningless...
The part that should grab everyone's attention. That moment when Tsarukyan pulled out didn't just postpone what everyone figured was his inevitable climb to a title shot. It might have completely changed the trajectory of everything he's been working toward. And we're just now starting to see how deep this goes. If you really tune into how Dana discusses him these days, the way he phrases things, his tone when the name comes up, the message rings loud and clear, like he's broadcasting exactly where things stand. Whatever went down in those conversations, whatever was said or left unsaid, Dana White is still holding on to it and making sure everybody understands that.
About this situation. He spoke about it in the post-fight press conference. Let us take a look at what he said. He talked about Terrence Crawford. He talked about the belt being taken away. He also talked about the TV deal. But for now, let's take a listen to what he said about Terrence Crawford in particular.
Here's the thing, though. To really get why this whole situation blew up like it did, why it became such a massive deal instead of just another fighter backing out of a bout, we need to roll back the timeline to that exact moment when everything completely unraveled. That's where this entire mess actually starts. And that's where all the tension that's still messing with Tsarukyan's career today first began building up. When you see what happened after that and how everything unfolded step by step, suddenly it all starts clicking into place, and you understand why the UFC reacted so harshly and why Dana took the whole thing so personally that he's still bringing it up.
And if you look at how this thing's playing out, first of all, let me say this. I love that all these guys, all these boxing guys, love the Ali Act the way it is now. I want to see how many of them actually stay there and do that version of the Ali Act instead of the add-on that we're going to do. You know what I mean? You don't have to be a rocket scientist to see what's going on with all these guys. They're all these guys that are crying the loudest are the problems. They're the problem, every one of these guys. And, you know.
The rankings tell the whole story here. When Tsarukyan made that phone call and withdrew from his massive title shot, the shot that was going to elevate his entire career and cement his place among the elite in the division, this wasn't just some scheduling hiccup the UFC could easily fix. This turned into a complete nightmare for the organization from every business angle you can imagine. Picture what they were suddenly dealing with. They had absolutely no main event for their pay-per-view card. Zero backup options, because who keeps someone ready to step into a title fight? An enormous pressure coming from all sides to somehow rescue the entire event and avoid letting down fans who'd already bought tickets and booked flights.
It was gotta be me. No way they can give petty people a fight. Everybody gonna laugh at them because I'm number one contender. I proved it again. And what do they want from me? And I went there, performed, just destroyed Dan Hooker. And they want to put the guy who is...
That's when Renato Moicano, who wasn't even training for a fight and had no preparation time, stepped forward and agreed to take the bout on incredibly short notice, which is basically career suicide in this game. And this is where the money became a real problem. The UFC had to throw an absolutely enormous payday at Moicano just to get him to accept that kind of risk and keep their show from falling apart. We're talking emergency money, way beyond his normal rate. The kind of desperate payment you make when your back's against the wall. That emergency scramble and that massive unexpected expense really got under Dana White's skin in a major way. People inside the organization, sources close to the whole situation, say it felt like a setup to Dana, like he'd been cornered and manipulated somehow. Dana, who absolutely cannot stand being caught off guard by fighters or put in positions that make him look foolish, viewed this entire mess as personal humiliation on the biggest stage possible. You have to remember he'd been promoting this fight for weeks, selling the matchup to everyone, building up Tsarukyan as the next big threat in the lightweight division, the young, hungry challenger ready to take the crown. Then, out of nowhere, his challenger vanishes, and he's stuck trying to explain to the world what just happened. People who were in the building that night described Dana's reaction as immediate anger. Like you could physically see something change the second he got that call, saying the fight was canceled. Like something fundamental shifted in how he saw the whole situation. And then to make everything worse, when Moicano walked into that octagon, collected his massive emergency paycheck that the UFC never planned to spend, and then got finished quickly in the actual fight, that just poured gasoline on Dana's frustration. In Dana's mind, the entire night from beginning to end felt like he'd been taken advantage of when he was most vulnerable. Whether Tsarukyan actually planned it that way, whether it was genuinely just bad injury timing, stopped mattering to Dana. The damage was done, the money was gone, the embarrassment was public, and the UFC, as everyone who follows this sport knows, has a very long memory for moments like that. After all the chaos finally died down and everything settled from that disaster of a fight night, Tsarukyan started doing exactly what any top-ranked contender in his position would naturally do. He started making media rounds, pushing hard for his next title opportunity, demanding recognition from fans and the organization, insisting on the shot he felt he'd already earned through his octagon performances. On the surface, this makes perfect sense, right? But here's what Tsarukyan either missed or decided to ignore. There's an incredibly fine line between showing confidence in your abilities and coming off as demanding things you haven't earned. And in the UFC world specifically, that line is razor thin, and crossing it comes with real consequences. Behind the scenes, in meetings and conversations happening throughout UFC offices, all that public campaigning from Tsarukyan didn't play well with decision makers. Many people inside the promotion, from matchmakers to executives, felt like Tsarukyan was acting like the entire division owed him something, simply because of his ranking, like his position alone should guarantee whatever opportunities he wanted. Instead of quietly building momentum back through actions and fights, he kept pushing publicly in interview after interview. And here's what he failed to understand. The more interviews he gave, the more podcasts he jumped on, the more he talked about deserving title shots, the more he irritated the exact people who could either give him what he wanted or make his career incredibly difficult. Fighters who spend more time talking than fighting, who aren't staying active and proving themselves consistently, typically end up on Dana's problem list really quickly. And for Tsarukyan specifically, he was already on thin ice because of that withdrawal situation. Every additional media comment he made, every new demand for a title shot, every interview where he discussed what he deserved, just fed into the growing perception inside the UFC that he thought he was above the system every other fighter has to navigate. That's one absolute rule Dana White has never allowed in his entire time running the UFC. Fighters who act like they're bigger than the promotion, like normal expectations don't apply to them because of their talent or ranking. But the real explosion, the moment that sealed Dana's decision to push back hard, came when Tsarukyan made the strategic choice that was always going to create serious problems with UFC leadership. A fighter positioned at the top of the rankings, especially in a division as loaded as lightweight, is expected by the organization to stay busy and keep the division moving. Fight twice a year minimum, 3 times, if possible. Take challenging matchups, keep building momentum, keep giving fans reasons to stay invested. But Tsarukyan went completely dark for 18 months, with no fights booked, no momentum building, no activity whatsoever, and no indication he was in any rush to get back in there. To Dana and the UFC matchmakers, this wasn't simple inactivity that could be explained by injuries or personal problems. This was defiance. This was a fighter trying to use his ranking to force the UFC's hand. The UFC offered him several different matchups during this stretch, chances to fight and stay relevant, and according to people inside the organization, he turned them down. Not because he was seriously hurt and couldn't compete, not because of complex contract negotiations, but apparently because he could afford to wait financially, because he didn't feel pressured to take fights he didn't want. Tsarukyan has money. He's comfortable in ways most fighters aren't, and he was in absolutely no hurry to put himself at risk. But in the UFC's world, in how the promotion views fighter behavior, having money doesn't buy you privileges or special treatment. Actually, it makes you enemies, because now you're seen as someone who doesn't need them as much as they need you, and that power balance is something the UFC always wants to control. During Tsarukyan's extended vacation from competition, Charles Oliveira, a guy who's significantly older, more beat up from years of wars, and with way more wear and tear on his body from a long career, somehow managed to fight 3 complete times. Meanwhile, Tsarukyan fought exactly 0 times, not once, and that comparison spread quickly through the MMA community. Fans started asking tough questions on social media. Journalists began discussing it on shows and in articles. And Dana White noticed that because he notices everything that makes the UFC look bad. The longer Tsarukyan deliberately stayed out of action, the more UFC leadership interpreted his absence as a calculated power play, like he was trying to force them into giving him the specific title shot he wanted without having to earn it through activity. But here's what Tsarukyan apparently didn't grasp about how the UFC operates. The UFC doesn't bend for anyone, no matter how skilled, especially not for someone they already felt betrayed by after that withdrawal situation. By the time Tsarukyan finally returned to action against Dan Hooker in what should have been a triumphant comeback, the behind-the-scenes damage was already too deep to repair with one performance. Even a clean, dominant victory wasn't enough to fix things. The resentment from UFC management had taken root, had become part of how they viewed him as both a person and a business partner. And then Dana White finally broke his public silence about the whole situation in the most brutal, shocking way imaginable. Dana White is famous throughout the sports world for being direct and not sugarcoating his opinions. But what he said publicly about Tsarukyan shocked even hardcore fans who thought they'd heard everything from Dana over the years. When reporters asked him the straightforward question of whether Tsarukyan deserved a title shot based on his ranking and recent performance, Dana didn't hesitate for even 1 second, didn't pause to consider how to phrase it diplomatically. He said he didn't care, just straight up said it. Not about the wins Tsarukyan had piled up, not about where he sat in the rankings, not about the quality of his latest performance. He made it obvious none of that mattered to him. His exact words, which I'm cleaning up slightly for platform guidelines, were basically, "I don't give a damn," a statement so cold and dismissive it shocked people. A statement that personal isn't normal in how Dana usually discusses active, highly ranked contenders. It's not casual matchmaking talk, it's not business as usual, it's personal, deeply personal, and everyone recognized it immediately. In one sentence, those few words told the entire MMA world that something major behind the scenes had broken in the relationship between Dana and Tsarukyan. And if there was any doubt remaining in anyone's mind about how serious this situation had, Dana made it even clearer in follow-up comments. He stated that Tsarukyan wouldn't be getting a title shot just because the official rankings say he should be next in line, that rankings alone weren't going to determine his path forward. Instead, Dana insisted that Tsarukyan needed to earn his opportunity again from the ground up, needed to prove himself all over again. He compared it to how Petr Yan had to earn his way back into title contention after losing his bantamweight belt in the octagon. Except, here's the crucial difference that makes this situation so much harsher. In Tsarukyan's case, this wasn't about losses inside the cage, wasn't about his performance level declining, wasn't about his technical skills being questioned. This was about punishment, pure and simple punishment for perceived disrespect and disloyalty. And when the UFC wants to punish a fighter, when they really want to send a message, they don't hide it or pretend it's something else. They drag them through the rankings slowly. They block obvious opportunities. They make the road back long and exhausting and nearly impossible. Not because the fighter isn't skilled enough or doesn't deserve it based on merit, but because someone at the very top of the organizational hierarchy is sending a clear message to that fighter and everyone else watching, and in Tsarukyan's specific case, that message couldn't possibly be clearer. You crossed a line and now you're going to pay for it. Once Dana made his personal feelings public in such a direct way, the entire landscape around Tsarukyan changed overnight dramatically. Before those comments, before Dana made his position crystal clear, Tsarukyan was widely viewed as the guy everyone assumed would be fighting for the lightweight belt relatively soon. He was the prodigy everyone discussed, the exciting future of the division, the one legitimate threat people genuinely believed could give Islam Makhachev real, serious problems in a rematch based on how competitive their first fight was. But after Dana's brutally honest comments hit the MMA media, suddenly the message being sent to the division and to fans was completely different. The new message was obvious. You're not next in line. You're not even close to a title shot. You're not getting anything handed to you just because you think you deserve it based on talent or ranking. And the UFC's matchmaking decisions started reflecting exactly that new reality almost immediately. Insiders with knowledge of UFC matchmaking began hinting to journalists that Tsarukyan would need 2 more fights, maybe even 3 additional fights, before the UFC would even seriously consider giving him another title opportunity. That's a requirement no other top lightweight contender had been asked to fulfill in recent years under similar circumstances. Even Petr Yan, who Dana compared him to, who actually lost his championship belt inside the octagon in devastating fashion, only had to win 3 fights before getting another shot at gold. But Tsarukyan didn't lose a belt in the cage. He didn't get knocked out or submitted. He just lost his patience and made some decisions the UFC didn't like. There's a massive difference between those two situations, but the punishment is somehow even harsher. And here's the most frustrating part of his current situation. Every single fighter ranked in the top 5 of the lightweight division knows exactly how dangerous Tsarukyan is inside the octagon. They've watched his fights, they've studied his style, and they know accepting a fight with someone that's skilled is a massive risk with very little reward attached to it, especially if he's not fighting for a title or in a #1 contender bout. So now Tsarukyan is stuck in this weird limbo, this professional no man's land that's incredibly frustrating. The UFC is publicly saying he needs to fight more to earn his way back, but the specific opponents he needs to beat to move up won't sign contracts to fight him unless the UFC forces him to take the matchup, which the UFC isn't particularly motivated to do. In other words, Tsarukyan is trapped in possibly the most frustrating position any top contender can find themselves in. And it's not because of his skills, not because his performances haven't been good enough, but purely because of the politics and personal relationships surrounding him. There's one matchup that fans have been absolutely screaming for since last year, posting about it constantly on social media, making fantasy posters, debating how it would play out. Ilia Topuria versus Arman Tsarukyan. 2 young killers at the peak of their abilities, 2 rising stars who seem destined for greatness, 2 fighters who could legitimately be champions in the making. On paper, from a pure fighting standpoint, it's absolutely perfect. It's the kind of fight that would break social media and do massive numbers. But behind the scenes, according to people with knowledge of UFC thinking, it might be the one fight the UFC has absolutely no interest in making happen, at least not anytime soon. Not because it wouldn't sell, because it obviously would do huge business, and not because fans don't desperately want to see it, because the demand is clearly there. But because booking that specific fight would mean giving Tsarukyan exactly what Dana doesn't want him to have right now. It would give him momentum back, it would give him visibility on a major stage, and most importantly, it would give him leverage in negotiations, and that's something the UFC carefully controls. Dana already feels that Tsarukyan played him once, embarrassed him with that withdrawal situation, and he's not about to hand him a massive career-defining opportunity that could launch him straight back into the title conversation like nothing ever happened. And here's the part that most casual fans miss when they wonder why certain fights don't get made. Topuria is incredibly valuable to the UFC right now as an asset. He's young and in his prime. He's charismatic and does great interviews. He's undefeated in the UFC with that perfect record intact, and he's a legitimate star in Europe and Latin America, which are huge markets the UFC wants to grow. The promotion sees him as a future pay-per-view machine, someone who could headline Madison Square Garden, someone they can build around for years. So why in the world, from a cold business perspective, would they risk all of that by putting him against someone as dangerous and unpredictable as Tsarukyan, especially when Tsarukyan is a fighter Dana personally believes doesn't deserve the spotlight right now? From a business standpoint, when you remove emotion and just look at assets and risk management, the answer becomes obvious. They wouldn't take that risk. Not now. Maybe not ever. And that's exactly why industry insiders, people who understand how the UFC operates, whisper that the promotion will stretch this feud out for years before ever letting those two actually touch gloves in the octagon. If that fight ever happens at all, which isn't guaranteed, because as long as Dana White feels that Tsarukyan needs to be humbled, needs to learn his lesson about respect and loyalty, every single big opportunity will be carefully managed. Every title shot will be postponed. Every super fight will be dangled just out of reach. Every high-stakes matchup that could change his career will be placed one fight away. Always one more fight away. It's a way of reminding him and reminding every other fighter watching this situation unfold about who actually controls a fighter's destiny in this sport. And it's not the fighter, no matter how talented they are. The UFC is built on two fundamental things that work together: skill and politics. You need both to reach the top. And right now, at this exact moment in his career, Tsarukyan is caught directly in the middle of both of those forces. This isn't the first time Dana has held a grudge against a fighter, not by a long shot, and it definitely won't be the last time we see this pattern. The history of the UFC is absolutely full of elite, incredibly talented fighters who ended up on the wrong side of the UFC precedent for various reasons. Fighters who were forced into brutal matchups they didn't want, fighters who sat through long layoffs watching others get opportunities, fighters whose timing was deliberately managed against them, or fighters who were never allowed within reach of the championship belt ever again despite clearly deserving a shot. Some of those fighters recovered and eventually made it back into Dana's good graces. Some didn't, and their careers were never the same. The pattern is always the same when you study these situations. If Dana feels betrayed by a fighter, if he feels like they showed him disrespect or tried to maneuver around him, he pushes back twice as hard. And he has the entire organizational structure to support that. And Tsarukyan's biggest mistake in this whole saga wasn't the injury that forced the withdrawal, wasn't the year and a half of inactivity, wasn't even the attitude he displayed in interviews afterward. His biggest mistake was fundamentally misreading the balance of power in his relationship with the UFC. He thought being wealthy meant he could afford to wait for the perfect opportunity. He thought being ranked #1 meant he could choose his opponents in timing. He thought being incredibly talented meant he could negotiate from a position of strength. But in the UFC's ecosystem, in the way Dana White has structured this organization, the fighter who tries to outmaneuver the promotion, who tries to play chess with management, almost always loses in the end, because Dana White has built an entire global empire, a multi-billion-dollar organization on one fundamental idea that he'll never compromise on. Nobody is bigger than the UFC. Nobody has more power than the promotion itself. And Tsarukyan is now learning that lesson the hard way, in real time, with his career hanging in the balance. Still, despite all the tension, all the politics, all the personal beef between him and Dana, one thing is absolutely undeniable when you watch him fight. Tsarukyan is special, genuinely special, as a fighter. His skill set is elite in every area. His potential ceiling is incredibly high, and his ability to push top-level competition to the absolute brink is something that even Dana White can't ignore forever, no matter how angry he is. So the big question that everyone in the MMA world is asking becomes this: can Tsarukyan actually fight his way back into Dana's good graces? Can he repair this relationship through performances? Maybe, possibly, but the path he faces is absolutely brutal and unforgiving. He'll likely need at least 2 high-profile wins against big names that the UFC chooses very carefully. Opponents designed to test him. These will be fights that prove not just skill and technique, but loyalty to the organization, consistency in showing up, fighting hunger that Dana wants to see, and activity above all else. He'll need to stay busy, no matter what, even if the matchmaking feels unfair or the timing isn't perfect. He'll need to show willingness to say yes to difficult matchups without public complaints, without going to media and complaining about it. Because right now, at this stage, Tsarukyan isn't just fighting other contenders in the cage. He's fighting perception outside of it. He's fighting the narrative that's been built around him, that he's entitled and difficult. He's fighting the shadow of that moment he pulled out, which follows him everywhere. And most of all, most difficult of all, he's fighting against the sheer stubbornness of a man who has built an entire global empire by refusing to back down when he thinks he's right. A man who's beaten every challenge to his authority. But here's the thing that makes this story potentially amazing if it works out. If Tsarukyan does pull it off, if he battles through all the politics, all the deliberately slow matchmaking, all the obstacles that will be thrown in his way by design, his comeback could become one of the most impressive and inspiring in lightweight division history. And maybe, just maybe, if he gets through this and earns Dana's respect back through pure grit, the feud that nearly crushed his career could end up defining it in a positive way. could end up being the thing that made him great. When you strip everything else away, this story isn't really about an injury. It's not about a single missed fight. It's not even about money or contract negotiations. It's about pride, pure human pride on both sides. Two people who absolutely refused to budge from their positions. One fighter who believed he deserved more respect and better treatment. One promoter who felt personally disrespected and embarrassed. One moment in time that turned into a complicated rivalry that's actively shaping the future of the entire lightweight division and the careers of everyone in it. So now we're left with a single lingering question that only time will answer. Will Arman Tsarukyan rise again, fight through all of this, and get his title shot to prove he belonged there all along? Or will Dana White's personal resentment and the UFC's political machinery rewrite the ending of what could have been a legendary career, turning a potential champion into a cautionary tale? Only time will say how this plays out. But in the UFC, in this organization that Dana built, one truth never changes no matter what else happens. The biggest fights, the ones that really matter, the ones that truly shape careers and legacies, don't always happen inside the cage where everyone can see them. Sometimes the most important battles happen in offices, in negotiation rooms, in personal relationships, and in the quiet decisions about who gets opportunities and who doesn't. And right now, Tsarukyan is learning that the hard way.